In the summer of 1808, a massive fleet of Chinese warships sailed into the waters near Shenzhen with a single mission: destroy the pirates who had been terrorizing the South China Sea for years. The fleet was 35 ships strong, armed with cannons, and manned by some of the finest sailors in the Qing Imperial Navy. They had received intelligence that the infamous Red Flag Fleet was nearby, and the naval commanders were confident that today they would finally end the pirate menace once and for all. But as the government ships rounded a coastal bend, the commanders felt their confidence drain away. Because there, spread across the horizon as far as the eye could see, were hundreds upon hundreds of pirate vessels, war junks armed with cannons, smaller attack boats darting between the larger ships like sharks circling prey, and flying above every single one of them was a blood-red flag. The naval commanders had expected to find a pirate fleet. What they found instead was an armada. And standing at the head of this armada, commanding more ships and more men than most national navies could muster, was a woman. A woman who had been born into poverty. A woman who had been forced to work in a brothel as a teenager. A woman who, against all odds, had risen to become the most powerful pirate in human history. Her name was Zheng Yi Sao, and by the time that battle was over, half the Qing Imperial Navy would be destroyed, and some of their surviving ships would actually be absorbed into her fleet. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of incredible true stories from history, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do. So if that's of interest to you, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. In the year 1775, a baby girl was born in the Guangdong province of southern China. Her birth name was Shi Yang, though history would come to know her by many other names. She was born into the tanker people, a group who lived their entire lives on boats along the Chinese coast. The tanker were considered the lowest class in Chinese society, looked down upon by those who lived on land. They were forbidden from taking the civil service exams that could lift them out of poverty. They were forbidden from marrying people who lived on land. In the eyes of Chinese society, they were barely human. And within this already marginalized community, Shi Yang's family was particularly poor. So poor that when she reached puberty, around the age of 13, her family made a devastating decision. They sent her to work on a floating brothel in the port city of Canton. Now, a floating brothel, which was called a flower boat in Chinese, was exactly what it sounds like. It was a boat where men would come to drink, gamble, and pay for the company of women. It was a brutal existence. The women who worked there had no rights, no protection, and no future. They were essentially property. But here's where Shi Yang began to distinguish herself. Unlike many of the other women trapped in this situation, Shi Yang refused to simply accept her fate. She was intelligent, observant, and incredibly shrewd. She began to pay attention to the powerful men who visited the flower boats: merchants, politicians, military officers. She listened to their conversations, she learned their secrets, and she used that information to her advantage. According to some accounts, Shi Yang became famous in the Canton underworld, not just for her beauty, but for her wit and her ability to manipulate powerful men. She learned how to navigate a world that was designed to crush her, and she waited for her opportunity. That opportunity came in 1801, when Shi Yang was 26 years old. By this time, one of the most powerful pirates in the South China Sea was a man named Zheng Yi. He came from a family that had been pirates for generations, tracing their roots all the way back to the Qing Dynasty. Zheng Yi had spent years fighting as a privateer for the Vietnamese Tay-Son dynasty during their civil wars, and he had used that experience to build up an impressive pirate fleet known as the Red Flag Fleet. One day, Zheng Yi visited the flower boat where Shi Yang worked, and something about this woman caught his attention. Maybe it was her beauty, maybe it was her intelligence, maybe it was the way she seemed to understand power in a way that most people didn't. Whatever it was, Zheng Yi decided he wanted to marry her. Now, accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Zheng Yi simply asked for her hand in marriage. Others say he had his pirates raid the brothel and essentially kidnapped her. But what everyone agrees on is what happened after. Xi Yang negotiated. This woman, who had spent over a decade as essentially a slave on a floating brothel, looked one of the most feared pirates in China in the eye and told him she would only marry him under certain conditions. She wanted 50% of his earnings. She wanted an equal share of power over his fleet, and she wanted her voice to be heard in all major decisions. And Zheng Yi, the notorious pirate lord, agreed. When they were married, Xi Yang took on a new name, Zheng Yi Sao, which simply meant wife of Zheng Yi. It was not a name that celebrated her own identity, but within a few short years, that name would strike fear into the hearts of emperors. Together, Zheng Yi and Zheng Yi Sao proved to be an unstoppable team. He was the charismatic leader who could rally pirates to his cause. She was the strategic mastermind who could organize them into an efficient fighting force. Over the next few years, the couple worked to unite the various pirate gangs that operated in the South China Sea. This was no small task. These were independent operators who had been competing with each other, sometimes violently, for decades. But through a combination of diplomacy, intimidation, and promises of shared wealth, Zheng Yi and his wife convinced them to join together. By 1805, they had created something unprecedented, a pirate confederation. 6 major pirate fleets, each flying a different colored flag, had agreed to stop fighting each other and instead work together under a unified command structure. The Red Flag Fleet, commanded directly by Zheng Yi and Zheng Yi Sao, was the largest and most powerful. The other fleets included the Black Flag, the White Flag, the Blue Flag, the Yellow Flag, and the Green Flag. Together, this confederation controlled over 600 ships and somewhere between 40,000 and 70,000 pirates. To put that in perspective, at the same time period, the famous Caribbean pirate Blackbeard commanded 4 ships and about 300 men at the height of his power. Zheng Yi Sao's fleet was more than 200 times larger. The pirates established their base of operations on Lantau Island, in what is now Hong Kong. From there, they controlled the entire South China Sea. No ship could pass through these waters without either being robbed or paying the pirates for protection. Coastal villages were forced to pay tribute or face destruction. The Qing government, which was supposed to control these waters, was essentially powerless. And then, in November of 1807, everything changed. Zheng Yi was dead. The exact circumstances of his death remain unclear to this day. Some accounts say he was killed in Vietnam. Others say he died during a violent storm at sea. But whatever happened, Zheng Yi Sao suddenly found herself in an incredibly precarious position. She was a woman in a world dominated by men. She had no blood relation to the Pirate Confederation's founding family. By all rights, command should have passed to her husband's second-in-command, a young man named Zhang Bao, who Zheng Yi had adopted as a son years earlier. Many people expected Zheng Yi Sao to quietly step aside, to accept a comfortable retirement, to return to obscurity. They didn't know Zheng Yi Sao. According to legend, after her husband's death, Zheng Yi Sao summoned all the fleet captains to a meeting. These were hardened pirates, men who had spent their lives fighting and killing. They looked at this woman and waited to see what she would say. And what she said was this: "Under the leadership of a man, you have all chosen to flee from the government navy. We shall see how you prove yourselves under the hand of a woman." It was a challenge, it was a dare, and it worked. But Zheng Yi Sao was too smart to rely solely on bold words. She knew she needed alliances. She needed to secure her power through strategy, not just force. So she did something shocking. she began a relationship with Zhang Bao, her late husband's adopted son and former lover. This relationship scandalized some people. Zhang Bao was younger than her, and the nature of their connection was complicated by his previous relationship with her husband. But Zheng Yisao didn't care about scandal. She cared about power. By allying herself with Zhang Bao, she secured the loyalty of the younger generation of pirates while maintaining her position at the top of the hierarchy. She would eventually marry Zhang Bao, and together they would rule the pirate confederation as equals. He handled the day-to-day military operations. She handled the strategy, the finances, and the politics. It was a partnership that made them both stronger. But Zheng Yisao's real genius wasn't just in securing her position. It was in how she organized her pirates. You see, pirate fleets had always struggled with a fundamental problem: discipline. Pirates, by their very nature, were outlaws who didn't like following rules. They were prone to infighting, desertion, and chaos. This limited what pirate organizations could accomplish. Zheng Yisao solved this problem by implementing a strict code of laws that every pirate in her confederation was required to follow. And unlike the loose guidelines that other pirates operated under, her code had teeth. The first rule was simple. Only Zheng Yisao could authorize an attack. Any pirate who attacked a ship or village without permission would be beheaded on the spot. This ensured that the Confederation operated strategically rather than randomly. The second rule concerned loot. All captured goods had to be presented to the fleet leadership and registered before they could be distributed. The ship that captured the loot got to keep 20%. The remaining 80% went into a collective fund that was used to support the entire Confederation. Any pirate caught stealing from this fund was executed. The third rule was about desertion. Any pirate who deserted his post or went ashore without permission would have his ears cut off as a public warning. If he deserted a second time, he would be killed. But perhaps the most unusual rules concerned the treatment of captives, especially women. In an era when pirates were known for committing terrible crimes against their prisoners, Zheng Yisao implemented surprisingly strict protections. Female captives who were considered unattractive were to be released unharmed. Attractive captives could be purchased by pirates as wives, but only if the woman consented and the pirate agreed to be faithful to her. Any pirate who assaulted a female captive would be executed. Any pirate who was unfaithful to his wife would be executed. These rules might seem harsh, but they transformed the Red Flag Fleet from a loose collection of criminals into a disciplined fighting force. Pirates knew exactly what was expected of them and exactly what would happen if they failed. And the promise of shared wealth meant that everyone had a stake in the Confederation's success. Under Zheng Yisao's leadership, the Pirate Confederation became, in effect, a shadow government. They collected taxes from coastal villages. They issued passes that allowed merchant ships to travel unmolested for a fee. They even had their own bureaucracy to manage the collection and distribution of wealth. One British merchant who operated in the region during this time wrote, "No man dares sail without her permission. She is the storm." And the Qing government? They were terrified. In 1808, the government decided to take decisive action against the pirates. They gathered a fleet of 35 warships and sent them to destroy Zheng Yisao once and for all. We already know how that ended. The pirates didn't just defeat the government fleet, they destroyed it. Half the ships were sunk or captured. The survivors fled in disgrace. The government tried again. In October 1808, they sent another fleet under a commander named Lin Fath. Same result. The pirates crushed them. They tried a third time, and a fourth time. Each time, the result was the same. The pirates won. And each time they won, they captured more ships, more weapons, and more sailors who could be recruited into the Confederation. By 1809, the situation was so dire that the Qing government did something unprecedented. They asked for help from foreign powers. They approached the Portuguese, who had a colony in Macau. They even reached out to the British East India Company. The mighty Qing Empire, which had ruled China for nearly 2 centuries, was admitting that it could not defeat a woman who had started life as a slave in a floating brothel. The foreign powers agreed to help, mostly because Zheng Yisao's pirates had started attacking their ships too. In September 1809, a combined Chinese-Portuguese fleet attempted to trap the Red Flag fleet in a bay near a place called Tungchung. The battle that followed lasted for weeks. The Portuguese sent fire ships toward the pirate fleet, boats loaded with straw and explosives that were set ablaze and launched at the enemy. But the pirates extinguished the flames, repaired the captured ships, and added them to their own fleet. The blockade was a disaster for the Allies. But even as she was winning these battles, Zheng Yisao knew that she couldn't win forever. The Confederation was powerful, but it was held together by the force of a few charismatic personalities. If she died, or if one of her key allies turned against her, the whole thing could collapse overnight. And then, in January 1810, something happened that changed everything. Guo Podai, the commander of the Black Flag Fleet and one of the original members of the Pirate Confederation, turned traitor. He refused to support the Red Flag Fleet in battle, and then he actually fought against Zhang Bao. When the battle was over, Guo Podai surrendered to the government and was rewarded with a position in the imperial navy. Zheng Yisao saw the writing on the wall. If one fleet commander could betray her and be rewarded for it, others might follow. The Confederation was starting to crack. She needed to act fast. And so Zheng Yisao did something that no one expected. She surrendered. But this was not an ordinary surrender. This was a negotiation. And Zheng Yisao approached it the same way she had approached her marriage proposal years earlier, with boldness, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to accept anything less than what she deserved. The government's initial position was that all pirates must kneel before officials, surrender their weapons, and beg for mercy. Zheng Yisao refused. She demanded that she and her pirates be treated as equals, not as criminals. She demanded that they be allowed to keep their wealth. She demanded that her men receive amnesty and not be punished for their crimes. When negotiations stalled, Zheng Yisao did something extraordinary. On April 17, 1810, she personally led a delegation of 17 women and children to the government headquarters in Guangzhou. She walked in unarmed, faced the government officials, and negotiated directly with them. The official she negotiated with, a man named Bai Ling, had been trying to destroy her for years. Now she was sitting across from him, calmly discussing terms as if she were his equal, and in the end, he gave in to her demands. On April 20, 1810, Zheng Yisao officially surrendered, but the terms of that surrender were unlike anything the world had ever seen. The government granted amnesty to 17,318 pirates. These men who had terrorized the South China Sea for years walked away free. They were allowed to keep their wealth. Many of them were offered positions in the government military. Zhang Bao, Zheng Yisao's husband, was given the rank of lieutenant in the Imperial Navy and was allowed to keep a private fleet of ships. And Zheng Yisao herself? She kept everything. All the wealth she had accumulated during her years of piracy was hers to keep. She was allowed to marry Zhang Bao officially, even though it was technically illegal for a widow to remarry at the time. She received a noble title. And she walked away from the negotiating table having accomplished something that almost no pirate in history had ever managed. She retired on her own terms. There was a small matter of protocol that the government insisted on. As part of the amnesty, the pirates were supposed to kneel before government officials. Zheng Yisao found a way around this too. Her wedding ceremony to Zhang Bao was witnessed by a government official, and as part of the ceremony, the couple had to kneel. The government accepted this as fulfilling the requirement. Zheng Yisao had technically knelt, but she had done it as a bride, not as a criminal begging for mercy. After the surrender, Zheng Yisao settled into a comfortable life. She and Zhang Bao had a son in 1813 and later a daughter. Zhang Bao continued to serve in the navy, sometimes even hunting down other pirates, until his death in 1822. After her husband's death, Zheng Yisao moved to Macau and opened a gambling house. Some accounts say she also ran a brothel, which would have brought her life full circle in a strange way. She remained a powerful figure in the Macau underworld, a woman who had seen everything and survived it all. She died in 1844 at the age of 69, surrounded by her family and her wealth. She had lived a full life, from the lowest depths of society to the heights of power and back to a comfortable retirement. She had commanded the largest pirate fleet in human history. She had defeated the navies of China, Portugal, and Britain, and she had walked away from it all without ever spending a single day in prison. Compare her fate to other famous pirates. Blackbeard was killed in battle and had his head hung from a ship. Captain Kidd was hanged, and his body displayed as a warning to other pirates. Anne Bonny and Mary Read were captured and sentenced to death, though their sentences were delayed because they were pregnant. Almost every pirate you've ever heard of met a violent end or spent their final days rotting in prison.
Zheng Yisao.
She died of old age, in her own bed, having beaten the system at every turn. Today, historians consider her the most successful pirate who ever lived. Not just because of the size of her fleet, though that was impressive. Not just because of her military victories, though those were numerous. But because she understood something that most pirates didn't. That true power isn't just about what you can take, it's about what you can keep. She took control of the South China Sea, and she kept it for years. She accumulated vast wealth, and she kept it when she retired. She defied the expectations of her society, which said that a woman born into slavery could never be anything more, and she kept defying those expectations until the day she died. There's a statue of her now in Hong Kong, not far from where she once based her pirate fleet. Tourists walk by it every day, most of them not knowing the incredible story of the woman it represents. But those who do know her story often pause for a moment, looking up at the face of this woman who went from the bottom of society to the top of the world. Because Zheng Yisao's story isn't just about piracy. It's about what's possible when someone refuses to accept the role that society has assigned to them. It's about intelligence, determination, and the willingness to take risks that others wouldn't dare. It's about a woman who looked at a world designed to crush her and said, "No, I will crush you instead." And that's exactly what she did. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's story, please let me know in the comments what other incredible historical figures you'd like to learn about. And remember, we have a whole playlist of amazing true stories from history ready for you to watch right now. So click here and keep exploring. Until next time.